Hello and welcome to the final video of Board Game Madness 2024. I'm your host, Mike Ganade, and before we get to the final matchup, first of all, thank you so much for sticking with me through this process. If you remember watching some of our earlier videos, I mentioned that I'd be selling some of the losers of the first round. And the reason I said some and not all is because there were a couple tough matchups with the seeding for games that I think could have gone a lot farther. And obviously these all being games in my collection, some of which I really liked. I didn't want to lose some of my favorites just because they went up against a higher seed or one of my favorite games in my collection or something like that. So first things first, I've sort of made a list of the games that I'll be putting up for sale on Board Game Geek Marketplace. The link to buy any of these games is in the description below, but I am planning on putting up the following losers from the first round for sale. Recland Run, Role Player, Meeple Land, Radlands, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Imhotep, Rolling Heights, Century Spice Road, War of Whispers, and Star Realms. So I'm committed. Instead of putting up just 8, half of the losers, I'm actually putting up 10 of the losers. But looking back on this list and looking over everything, I did find a few games that I think got eliminated early on because they just had a tough matchup and are actually some of, potentially in the top 10 of my collection. So I wanted to highlight a couple of these games before we move on to the final matchup. And this is just a special call out to some of my favorites that I think could have gone a lot farther had the matchups been a little bit different. So my 3 sort of dark horses, early upsets are Caper Europe, Ankh, and 3-Ring Circus. So I'll just talk about each one really quickly because I do like these games a little bit. Caper Europe is a great head-to-head game. It has absolutely amazing production. I love the artwork, and it's a really tense game that's super enjoyable. It's sort of a tug of war against another player. I think the reason it sort of fell short is because it is only a 2-player game, and it faced off against Obsession, which just is a really solid thematic Downton Abbey type game. So, that wasn't. I do think that game could go a lot further, in the second or third round. If you were to tell me, if I were to guess where that game would sort of fall in my collection, I think it would make the top 16 for sure. But it didn't this particular time. Another game I wanted to call out is Ankh. This is the third game in Eric Lang's sort of area control series from Simon Games. It has amazing production. It has one rule, which is very controversial. It's this merge rule instead of eliminating players. And I get why people don't like it. I get why it's in there because it's so thematic for the Egyptian culture thing and the merging of gods. But in practice, it's controversial to play the game that way. But the thing about Ankh that I love is it's the only area control game I've ever played that plays equally fantastic at 2 as it does at 3, 4, or 5. It's a meatier game, and sort of the problem when it comes to me and my collection is it's such a heavier game that it's hard to get family members or more casual friends to sort of bite that off and try that game. But it's a shame because the game is truly great and the rules aren't particularly overwhelming. I think it's a really solid game. It's probably my favorite area control game that I have in my collection. And it's a shame that it didn't go further in the competition. So a quick shout out to Ankh. And then last but not least, the final game on my list was 3-Ring Circus. And 3-Ring Circus is like a brand new game. It came out at Gen Con this past year in 2023, and I think it just didn't have enough ratings on Board Game Geek to be high enough in the seeding, and it was a really low seed and went against a really tough matchup. Hold on a second, I'm checking. It went up against the Crew Deep Sea, and the Crew is just such a fun game that, I think it's a real shame because I think 3-Ring Circus is very strong. It's a really strong Euro. It's also an area control game like Ankh, in a sort of weird way where you're setting up circuses. I love the theme. I love the production. I have a few critiques over just making the game sort of language agnostic and using too much symbology and hieroglyphics on the cards. and not having enough reference cards for that. But the game is a really solid game. Engine builder, circus builder, and I would have loved to see it go against some other games in sort of our tournament with different matchups. So maybe in a future video series, I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to put that aside, and we'll move on to today's matchup. Just get this paper out of the way. Which is the number 4 seed. This is our championship round. These are the last 2 games. We have the number 4 seed, Pandemic Legacy Season 0, versus the number 18th seed, Clank Catacombs. So what's interesting about this matchup is we have, a cooperative game and a competitive game. So in some ways, these are already my favorite cooperative and competitive games in my collection. And I'm sort of going to be stuck picking which side of the fence I fall on, I guess, between competitive and cooperative, and which one I think is sort of more inherently fun. So let's jump right into it and go into production. For production, I think we can be a little quicker in this and sort of talk about the key points about each game. You should be familiar with the game if you watched some of our previous videos. So production-wise, I have to give it to Pandemic Legacy Season 0. I know I'm going that way. The legacy nature of it, having all these different boxes and components to open, is super fun. The stickers and the passports, I can't say enough about creating your character in this game. I'm not a big RPG player, but it's as close to, I care as much about my passport alias as I think players care about their RPG characters, essentially, at least at the beginning. But creating that is as fun as creating like an RPG character, because just using the stickers and picking your skills and playing through the game, that way you get really attached to it. And then you want to pick which alias. I love the fact that you have multiple aliases and you can pick which alias and skills to approach any given scenario with. And it's just a great production piece. That passport character piece is a really cool component. And then everything that you open in these boxes is delightful. You have solid plastic components, really interesting little minis and agents that go on the board. It's probably the best Pandemic production I've seen, at least recently. It's a really solid game, and I love the art direction, the motif of the 1960s sort of spy thriller. Now, that being said, Clank has some great fun art on it and does a really good job of getting you what you need for the game. I like the custom meeples a lot for each character. It's probably my favorite component in the game. And the bag, the velvet bag that you pull cubes out of, is an essential Clank experience that's just a ton of fun and a great production component as well. But that being said, just the sheer excitement over opening new components constantly in a legacy game, I have to give it to Pandemic Legacy Season 0. Now, next up we have game mechanics, and here is where I sort of have to pick whether it's cooperative or competitive and which one shines stronger for me. And the first thing I would say is that I think it depends entirely on the group you're playing with. I have some friends that are super competitive, and I get a ton of enjoyment out of beating them in a game. And for those types of games, I'm going to pick Clank Catacombs. My wife is a big fan of Pandemic, the Pandemic system, and there are other players we play with that like to be more engaged, sort of as a communal, fun activity to do together. And I think cooperative games serve those types of groups a lot better. And obviously, I think both of these games are exceptional when it comes to competitive and cooperative. If I were to call out missteps, or mistakes in game design in each of these games, if this was Pandemic Legacy Season 2, I would have a lot of mechanics issues. But I actually think Season 0, mechanically, is one of my favorite games. I may even like it more than Season 1 or the traditional Pandemic with the disease cubes. I really like these agents amassing and you having to drive these vans into each sector to eliminate the threat of the communist agents or the behind the Iron Curtain agents. So I actually think the core loop of this game is a good change of the core Pandemic system that I really enjoy. Clank Catacombs is the best version of Clank there is, in my opinion. I had a ton of fun with the Legacy version of Clank as well, just to tie it back to this one. But the Legacy version of Clank doesn't have the same modular boards and the modularity and replayability of the Catacomb boards that this version does. So, and it's a Legacy version, so you're only going to play it so much, but it has that same excitement. So if the Legacy aspects of this sound super exciting to you, definitely give Clank Acquisitions Incorporated a try. It's a ton of fun. I personally don't own it, but I had a friend who had a copy who we've been playing together when we have a chance, playing through that as well. So there is a Legacy version of Clank if some of those aspects feel more important to you. But game mechanics wise, Clank Catacombs fixes so many of the problems I've had with former Clanks. And, I may cop out here and just say that if it came down to just gameplay, I don't think I would pick one. I think it really depends on the mood I was in and whether I wanted to play a competitive or cooperative game. If I wanted to play a cooperative game, I would go here. Although obviously once you start a season, you're sort of locked in with the players you have. But you can switch in and out as long as people are familiar with it and you help them. Clank Catacombs, on the other hand, is open and a little more flexible in getting to play with new groups. So all of those things are factors, but I really couldn't pick from a gameplay side of things which one I feel more strongly about. So I think we need to move on to theme. And theme, I would go with... I think both games tie their mechanics and themes really well to each other. This is a tough one. Clank does nothing wrong. I just don't feel as strongly about the theme because it's sort of very cartoony and fun. It doesn't leave me with a lasting impression about theme the way Pandemic Legacy does. Pandemic Legacy, I finished playing the game or that month, especially if that month has introduced a new mechanic, and it's so insanely memorable. And this is true of Season 1 and even Season 2 to an extent, that each game session is so extremely memorable and literally is affecting your next games by putting stickers on the board, that I just think the theme is what this game does so strongly. And the fact that the mechanics back it up make it even better. But I absolutely adore this spy thriller. It has a loose story, which is enough for me, but the game is super fun. And I literally can't think of a time that we brought this game out and set it up to play it and haven't played more than 2 games in a row. We always play at least 2 games in a row, because if you're going to get it out and set it up, you may as well play. It's so much fun to finish a game, open new stuff, that you immediately want to play another one. And I think that just goes to show you how strong the theme is. And then jumping into replayability, how much these legacy pandemics drive you to play all of the content. The game does such a good job actually having you play everything in the box before you sort of get rid of it or put it away for good. And I love that because it's what I do with my video games. Like, I get a video game, I'm super into it, I play it nonstop, then I beat it and I move on. And I love having that in board games. I think it's something we're missing in board games, the ability to just sort of let these games go and be done with them. I appreciate that these legacy games give me that closure. So from a replayability standpoint, I can't give it to Pandemic simply because there is a finite number of times you can play this box before you have to buy it again. Whereas Clank, literally, the strongest thing about this Clank is like almost infinitely replayable and expandable, which is such a giant leap forward over what the other Clanks have offered. So I have to give replayability to Clank in this particular category, but don't get me wrong, I do love that Pandemic drives you to enjoy and see everything that it has to offer. So that's going to bring us to the end here, and Pandemic has won 2. They've tied 1, and Clank only won 1 category. So apparently, that means Pandemic Legacy Season 0 is the favorite game in my collection currently, and it's going to be our champion for this year. And I should say, I don't know if I'm ever going to do this again. It was a ton of work. But if I were to do it again, I promise that this champion will be retired and will not be in the tournament again, because by that time I'll probably have finished it and gotten rid of it. And I'll have that closure I was talking about. So this is our champion game for 2024. But, you know, if you haven't been watching, all of the Sweet 16 games, really all the games in this tournament are from my own personal collection. They're all games I like and enjoy a lot and have kept over the years. I just need to cull because I have a lot of new games that I'm always getting and I need to make room for them on my shelf. So if you've liked this series, please let us know. It's been a ton of work. I don't know if it's something we can do annually, but maybe we can do it biannually or like the Olympics or something. But we do have plenty of new games we could have in a future tournament. I have Sleeping Gods, Distant Skies, which I mentioned. Sleeping Gods went pretty far, and I have Distant Skies. It's still not open yet, but I'm looking forward to giving that a try soon. And then I finally got a copy of Heat, which I have played a friend's copy. This is one of the few games I've played that I felt really lived up to the hype I was hearing about it. I think it's incredibly fun, but I've only played it like once or twice at a friend's house, and I finally was able to get a copy. It's hard to come by for a while there, so we could add that into a tournament in the future. There's other games, of course, I can include in this particular tournament. So if there's any games you'd love to see go head-to-head in a future Board Game Madness event, please let us know. In the future, once we have enough games, maybe we could even do a Rock Manor Games specific Board Game Madness where it's all of the games we've sort of published here. I think we need at least 16 to do it properly, which we're not quite there yet. Maybe in a few years we can do Rock Manor Games Board Game Madness and let you know where I stand on things with the games we've produced. But let us know in the comments what you think, what you thought of this series. Thanks for watching, and we'll get back to our regularly scheduled Rock Manor game news in future videos. So if you're interested in the games that we publish and design, please subscribe, and you'll see the trailers and playthroughs and previews of those games in the future. But that's it for us and Board Game Madness. Thanks again for watching. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.